Guilliman followed the Captain General Valoris of the Adeptus Custodes as they descended down the pathway towards the Golden Throne. With every step he moved slower, his mind tearing itself between the practical and theoretical of what might transpire when he would finally cross the threshold and come face to face with his father. All of Ultramar's resources had been put to the task of making this moment a reality, but only now was it dawning on him that he had never taken a moment to actually think about what he wanted to say. "We have arrived," said Valoris, snapping Reboot out of his trance, as they stopped before a massive gate made out of gold, covered with a Gothic arch on both sides. "I must warn you, standing near to his presence is difficult, even for us. Be wary that you are not overwhelmed." "I have been here before," retorted the Lord of Ultramar firmly. "Yet everything has changed since you were last treading these halls, Primarch," snapped the Custodes, his resentment clearly showing through stoic demeanor. "Know this, if you even so much as have a treacherous thought in his presence, I will end you." Before Guilliman could respond, Valoris put up his hand to silence him. "Enough talk. The Master beckons." Realizing that no good would come out of addressing the Captain General's insults, Reboot opened the gate and walked inside the throne room. When he entered, all he saw was a golden light that encompassed every inch of the chamber. It was oddly calm, despite the towering presence of the Emperor emanating from the center of the room. All of the Mechanicus adepts tasked with preserving the Golden Throne and the Custodes charged with guarding it had been removed, so that the Master of Mankind could grant his son a private audience. As he approached the throne, he realized that he had tears in his eyes. He had chastened some of his sons who had offered such displays of reverence after he had been resurrected, and the irony was not lost upon him. Perhaps, he thought, this is how all humans were genetically programmed to react when reunited with the man who had sired them. Guilliman gently lowered himself to his knees and whispered a single word. "Father." Suddenly, he felt the aura within the room begin to change dramatically. Where there had been peace, energy now oozed from every pore, electrifying the entire atmosphere, and then the psychic shock struck him. The 13th returns. Gasping for air, as if drowned by a tidal wave, Guilliman tried his best to compose himself. The psychic essence of the Emperor was like an inexplicable weight hammering him into the ground, and if he wasn't kneeling already, he would surely have had to do so now. "What has happened to you, Father?" questioned the Primarch painstakingly. He couldn't explain what was wrong, but deep down he sensed something had changed within the Emperor after he had been entombed for countless millennia. "What fate has decreed for me?" "What do you mean?" responded Guilliman, bewildered by the answer. He had never heard him use such words during the Great Crusade, and in his desperation to grasp their meanings, he asked his father another question, one that had gnawed away at him ever since his rebirth. "How could you have allowed all this misery and strife to befall our Imperium?" "I am not the shepherd humanity seeks. It was always ambition that they would no longer have need of me. All I can do now is protect them as I see fit, so that one day they may rise on their own. Guilliman's confusion quickly turned into burning rage. And if they don't? Bellowed the Primarch angrily. What if their flame is extinguished long before they realize your dream for you? Then that is what fate would have decreed for them. Why do you keep talking of fate? Spat Roboute. You've always taught us that humanity would forge its own destiny. Guilliman's shock became palpable. He had assumed that when he had met his father, they would lay down their plans on how to strike back at those trying to subjugate or eradicate humanity, but instead he found a grieving man looking only for a sympathetic ear. It was hubris that made me believe I alone had the answers. Pride is the greatest sin, which is why I suffer the greatest punishment. And this suffering? Is it penance? Or your solution? To wither away while humanity begs and pleads for their saviour, hoping that he might listen? I have always heard them. Every lie, every prayer, every shout and every scream. I heard you when you cried out for me to save you. Would you like to know the price I paid to keep you alive? Of the billions that blinked out of existence so that you may survive? The revelation made Guilliman look away from the throne out of shame. He remembered Thiel and his sons fighting to save him after he lost his duel with Fulgrim. He detested the fact that so many souls, including those of the Ultramarines, had been sacrificed to spare him. You need not carry this burden alone, he managed to mutter. You speak of fulfilling my vision, Lord of Ultramar. When my body has lain shattered amongst the best of you, I already knew my dream had died with them. Those words cut deeper than any wound he had ever received on the battlefield. Knowing full well that he deserved better, Guilliman still tried to desperately steer the conversation away from the madness it was fast evolving into. Father, You are not my son. None of you ever were. You were my gifts to humanity. 20 shining beacons, who would have ushered us into a new age as the rightful rulers of the galaxy. Yet not one of you could rise above your personal desires, and allowed everything I had given to you to be squandered. Guilliman had heard enough. The light had finally vanished from his eyes, and all he gazed upon now was a broken man on top of a decaying throne, forever locked away in his misery. Humanity revered the Emperor as a god, and here was proof that he was nothing more than a man, trapped in a prison of his own making. It was becoming increasingly difficult for him to hide his resentment. He and his brothers, no matter how flawed they were, had done their best to serve this man's vision. Every step towards damnation was taken happily, if it meant his sons could appease their father. He remembered Monarchia, and how his actions had culminated in the betrayal of the Word-Bearers. The Emperor's wanton disregard for their legacy, the legacy of his brothers, steeled Roboute's hearts for the gathering storm. I will not allow us to go gently into the night, spoke the Lord of Ultramar finally. Do you hear me, Father? You may have turned your back on us,
But I will never betray humanity.
As is your choice.
Lord Commander.
That was it,
realized Guilliman. This entire charade was perhaps just another act of manipulation to goad him into action, to do what was necessary to save the Imperium both from within and without. Had his father anticipated this outcome? Had he already seen this happening millennia ago?
The Emperor was powerful enough to read
his mind without him realizing.
Was he doing so now? Was anything he said actually true? Was he always this cruel, or did his entombment cause him to be this way?
Every possibility made him angrier, and he turned around and started walking toward the gate, bringing an abrupt end to their conversation. As he opened it, he looked back and asked one final question.
Why do you still fight? No answer came forth. The energy in the room had already begun to dissipate. He could see his father atop the golden throne, but could no longer feel his presence. "Answer me!"
shouted Guilliman, alerting the custodies who began to rush towards the gate to restrain him. "Why do you still fight?"
As the guards closed in around him, a piercing
light stopped them all dead in their tracks, and Roboute Guilliman, Lord of Ultramar, received the answer he craved for. 6 words burnt into every fibre of his being. 6 words that formed the phrase so trivial, so insignificant, yet it had ensured humanity's continued existence for 10,000 years amongst an uncaring cosmos. The words had borne witness to Ferris charging the traitors on Istvan, and had compelled Sanguinius to face Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit. They had seen the lowliest guardsmen hold the line against insurmountable odds, and were a lesson that Space Marines taught themselves over and over. They were a grim reminder for each man, woman, and child of the Imperium of what was required of them. Fitting, then, that the Master of Mankind spoke the same words he expected humanity to live by.
Only in death does duty end.